Welcome to the last part of scoring in major. This one's going to be in B flat, so we're going to see a key that uses flats. We see the notes B flat and E flat, and we can see that here in the key signature, because here in the treble clef and the bass clef, we see the notes B and E have a flat next to the clef. This means that anytime we have the note B or E written, it's automatically B flat and E flat because it's already marked there in the key signature. Make sure you checked out the previous videos in this series, scoring in major, because I explained a lot in the other videos, and here in this last video, not really having to explain much because I already explained so much that I wanted to say in those other videos. This one's going to be pretty simple. We're in B flat major, and here we have a simple melody. I'm going to quickly label the chords. We're going to listen to it, and then we're going to create a bass line for a melody that's already created. In the previous videos, I was explaining that you oftentimes want to have a good balance between your melody and your bass line, and you don't always want to focus on only the melody because then you may not be able to write a good bass line for it. So in this circumstance, I want to show, well, what happens if you already have the melody written and you want to write a bass line. So let's take care of this. Okay, so here are the chords that we use. The first measure just uses chord 1, so we have the notes B flat, D, and F. So we see a B with a passing tone to D, another B, and an F. So we see there's quite a lot of leaps going on here in this melody. Here in measure 2, we're using chord 4 for these two beats with these 4 eighth notes. So we have the notes E flat, G, and B in the chord. We see we started on a B, we went down to G, we had a passing tone of an F, and then we have an E. So all notes in the chord besides those passing tones there and that passing tone there. And again, I described what passing tones were in the previous videos. In the second half of measure 2, so beats 3 and 4, we have chord 5. So we have the notes F, A, and C. We see a C and an F. Then in the third measure, which is the last measure, we see chord 4, which has the notes E flat, G, and B flat. So we see that B, which is a B flat, and we see that E, which again is an E flat. Then this goes up to the next chord, which is the tonic chord, B flat, D, and F. So we see this goes up to that F there. It's a good thing to end on the tonic chord and the fifth of that tonic chord being in the top voice. It has a good sound to it. Okay, so now that we have this melody, now let's figure out a bass line to it. Okay, now let's create a bass line for this and keep this real simple. Okay, so let's see what we started with. We started with the 1 chord, the tonic chord. We have a B going up to D. Okay, so when I see that, what I'm analyzing is that we don't have the note F. Without saying anything too complex, I don't want to start with the note F because that'll be a second inversion triad. So in other words, there's a reason why I don't want to start with the note F. And what this has to do with is using the last note in the chord as the bottom note. So I have a B, D, F. The F is that last note. Instead of using that last note as the bottom note, I'm going to use a different note. So I already started on B there. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do the note D, and then that's going to go up to the note F. So while this is a B going to D, this is a D going to F. A simple trick that you can pick up on when you write some music. In this way, none of the notes are repeating at the same time, but you're also getting all the notes in the chord. Furthermore, there's a passing tone here on the 8th note, and that's convenient because we don't have to think about anything much. We have a quarter note here and a quarter note here. So in the duration of this first quarter note, we have that 8th note occurring in between it while it's on its way to this note. And then these notes harmonize together. Instead of finishing up the bass line there, I'm actually going to skip ahead to the very end. It's always good to create a good ending. And one reason to do it in the beginning, or towards the beginning, is because once you start writing a bunch of notes and you end up at the end, sometimes you can't write a very good ending. But if you already write something that sets you up for a good ending, you just work your way backwards. Or like I'm probably going to do, just make that ending that's good. And then now you can write leading up to that. Again, we're only using 2 voices, so it's really simple here. The top voice of this last measure, the last chord, I have F. I'm going to choose the note B flat. You see here on the actual staff, it's just a B. So we have a B and an F. This is because the B and the F are going to tell us this is a B chord. The other note I could have chosen in the chord would have been a D, but then we wouldn't have known if it was a D chord with the D and the F, because there could have been DFA. There's only 2 notes here. If it was DFA, it would be a D chord, and because of that, we wouldn't really know exactly what chord it is, and it's an ending chord, so we want to make it good, right? So we have that B flat and that F, so we know this is a B flat chord, and this is also the tonic chord, so it makes for a good ending. Okay, now that I added that, I'm not saying it's a really good ending or anything, but that's an ending, and there's thought and reason behind it, and we have that complete chord. So now I'm going to move on to measure 2. We have chord 5, we have chord 4 and 5. I'm actually going to go on the second chord in this measure, chord 5, because I'm not really sure what I'm going to do with those eighth notes yet. I'm going to kind of have some stuff surrounding it to help me figure out what I'm going to do. So chord 5, we have F, A, C. We see a C and it goes up to F. Again, what that tells me is we don't have the A. Now the question is, do I want the A here in this beat or the beat after this? And without getting too complex in the music theory, I'm going to choose the A in this measure. I like to think about intervals, and the third and the sixth are very nice intervals, and they're the same thing but inverted. So here's what I'm thinking. If I have an A here, and if I have an A here, they're both pretty nice because an A and a C creates a third, and an A and an F here creates a sixth. Okay, so I'm going to keep that first A. We have an A, C, we have a third, and then this A is actually going to go down to an F. This will help me get down here because I'm getting kind of low here in the last measure for this B. So that's going to help us make our way down to there. And then we have an F with an F above it, so we have an octave. And we're not doing counterpoint here, but this is what's known as contrary motion to an octave, because what's going on is we have an interval here. It doesn't matter what interval this is, but it matters that this interval is traveling in contrary motion. And what that means is we see in the top voice, it goes up, and in the bottom voice, it goes down. So what contrary motion means is they're going opposite. So you could also have the same thing if the top voice was going down, the bottom voice would go up, and they would be in contrary motion. If you do this to a perfect interval, a fifth and an octave, then you already understand a large portion of the rules of counterpoint, which just helps you to make all the voices in your music be able to be heard well. So if you want to check out counterpoint, know that I have a playlist about counterpoint, and I've taught from the very basic stuff to the more complex stuff, from 2 voices to 3 voices to 4 voices, and a lot of good information, practice exercises, stuff you can print at home. Everything is for free, including the lessons, the printouts. Everything on my channel is free. You don't pay for anything. There's no Patreon. Okay, so check it out if you want. It's all free. Okay, but trying to make this real simple. Let's kind of wrap this up here. We don't have a lot more notes to write. I'm going to make my way backwards to chord 4 here. We're going to be in the bass voice because that's what we're writing, just the 2 voices. We have E flat, G, and B flat as chord 4. Those are the notes. Let's look above. So we see it starts on a B, goes down to a G, and then an E. We do have a passing tone in the middle of that of an F. I want to be aware of that, but it's not something I'm going to think about too much here. So I'll follow kind of a similar method like I've been doing. So I see in the first note of the eighth notes, a B, which goes down to a G. Since it's chord 4, it's E flat, G, and B flat, so I don't see that E flat. You can see to where if I was explaining every time I was putting an E, saying E flat gets kind of redundant, it gets a little too much. Okay, now the question is what E? I'm going to look at the notes that surround it. We see that F here, we see that A here, we're in that register there, and we see surrounding it, it's sort of staying there. I could maybe want to add some interest and go outside of that, but I think I'm going to stay within this area of the register. Because of that, I'm going to choose the note E right here. And we see a passing tone is right here on this second beat, and it's the first note that occurs of these 2 eighth notes, and then it ends on a note in the chord. And this doesn't matter. What we're going to do is still think about the notes in the chord of chord 4. So E, G, B. We already had an E before, and we're landing here on an E on the last note of this eighth note. Because of that, I'm simply going to choose the note G. It's a good choice because it's just a third leap while this is going through all of these eighth notes. Then it's preparing us for the next chord. It's going in that same direction. It's leading us up to chord 5 there. And now we only have 2 more half note rests to fill in. I'm going to start in the beginning now. Now because I had some eighth notes in the beginning, and then I had some more eighth notes in the middle, I'm going to think about adding some eighth notes here in the bass line, so it sort of follows that same thing where we have these quarter notes and eighth notes, and then at the very end we have half notes, but we see it's mostly quarter notes and eighth notes. Okay, so here we are in the bass voice, and we're thinking about chord 1, so the notes B, D, and F. We see above this, we have the notes B and F. So I'm going to choose the note D, which is the note that's missing in this chord, but as I'm making my way down to the D, I'm going to add a passing tone in the middle of it. Okay, so we see the F goes to E, and then to D, we have the passing tone of an E in the context of the B chord, B, D, F, so this E doesn't fit in there, it doesn't belong. So it's going to be a passing tone, and it's going to exist at the same time while this note above it is occurring. And the fact that this note does occur in the chord is going to add some interest, because when these two notes occur together, it's going to add some ambiguity in the tonic chord here in the chord 1 of this measure, because you're going to hear the E and the B harmonize together, and that is going to create a fifth, so it's almost going to seem like an E flat chord. And because it has those notes, it very well could be, but this is all occurring in the context of that one chord, the B flat chord, and it's only occurring because we have this passing note of the E here, which occurs on that third beat of the first measure. So it's a sort of coincidental chord within the overall chord of that measure. Furthermore, the passing tone is just passing between two chord tones, and this note above the passing tone occurs in the chord. So that's why you can see to where it's not really actually expressing that chord fully, but it is sort of expressing that chord within what's going on of the original chord. Okay? Try not to get too complex, but this is the last video of this series, and this is like the very end, so I've explained enough, and I've tried to keep it real simple, so, you know, explain a little bit here. Okay, now I'm in the last measure. I'm thinking about chord 4. It's on this beat 1 and 2 here, so let's look at what comes before it. I have this F here, and then I land here on this B. So it's only a fifth away, but it is a distance, and I need to get from one to the other. It would be nice to kind of gradually get there. We've had a lot of stuff leaping around throughout this, especially in the upper voice. Okay, now here's what I did. Kind of contradicts what I just said, because I did a leap here, and actually looking at it, it's a seventh leap. The F goes down to the G. I'm not thinking about complex music theory or anything like that, so seventh leap, no big deal. We see then we leap up a sixth, and then from there we leap down a fourth. Again, I just like to think about intervals, so we see a lot of leaps. Furthermore, I said I wanted to add some eighth notes here in the first measure, and I honestly got sidetracked and I didn't do that. So now I'm going to add those eighth notes. So I added some eighth notes on the third beat of the first measure, and then I decided to add some eighth notes on the third beat of the second measure. Now I did something kind of interesting here, and that's because I had the passing tone here of the E between this F and this D. Within that overall context, I then went up from the E to that F here, as you see, within that. So it goes from the F down to the E, up to the F again. Okay, so it resolves that, and instead of this being a passing tone, now this became a neighbor tone in this context, where these eighth notes end. It's a note that belongs in the chord, and then that goes down to another note that belongs in the chord. So we see it was inspired from the beginning, and I still was able to, what I call, justify it musically, but I changed it from a passing note to now a neighboring note. In all, it's just a note that exists outside of the chord, and choosing to surround the note outside of the chord by two notes that are in the chord, and furthermore, that note outside of the chord only being one step away, is what's going on here. We're going to move on to measure 2. See, I added these two eighth notes. We see this time the eighth note begins on a note that's in the chord, and that was originally there. Then we have this note on this fourth beat here, which also was originally here. So we had the third in between this F and this A, and I simply added a passing tone in between that. Above that, there's just a quarter tone, so the quarter tone goes at the entire length while this passing tone is occurring, so it makes everything work out harmonically. We even followed the rules of counterpoint for the most part. I didn't really pay attention to that very much, but I kind of just do that naturally, and I notice certain things, like I have the fifth here, for example, first measure, third beat, we have the E and the B above it, and it goes in direct motion to that fifth, so I'm perfectly aware of that, but we are only using two voices here, so there's no reason why you're not going to be able to hear one of the voices. That's the reason why for the most part, you're following the rules of counterpoint. So without me going off, saying too much more random stuff, let's listen to a playback. Okay, sounds good enough to me. The main thing to pay attention to in these lessons are there aren't any parts that sound bad, like there's wrong notes, and that's basically the foundation of where you want to start. Other than that, the whole point of these videos was to make you less scared of looking at sheet music, less afraid of scoring, writing notes down on a piece of paper. As we see, we just scored in B flat major. We had the notes B flat and E flat, but the entire time while I was scoring it, I didn't even have to think about that. I was only just saying that because technically that's in the key, and I didn't want anyone to maybe get irritated by that or forget that those notes were in the key. But I'm always thinking about the key that I'm using. So I already know I'm in B flat. I've studied the circle of fifths, and I know, okay, we have B flat and E flat. When you study it, it's all in your head basically. So I already have that in my head, and then I'm just writing the notes that are in the chords, and I'm thinking about the chords that I'm using. And again, all this can be in your head. I'm writing it down here to make it easier. This is actually how I score music when I score music. I like to write the key that I'm working with, whether it's major or minor. I like to do the Roman numerals and have the notes associated with each chord. It really helps me. And then when you start to write multiple different keys in a piece, then you can look at what chords are in common with the different keys. And it's a little trick called a pivot chord, to where when you have the same chord in two different keys, you can be in your first key and play that chord, and then start to play chords that are in that second key, because that chord belongs in both of them. So it's a bridge that gets you from one to the other. A really interesting thing. I do have videos about all this stuff. And if I ever mention a video and you can't actually find it on my channel, just leave a comment and I'll leave you a link and title for that video. So that's it for this video. Get ready for the next little series of videos scoring in your relative keys, relative major first. We're just going to have one video about that, and then the next video will be relative minor, one video about that, and then we'll have two other videos about scoring in minor, and we'll be scoring in harmonic minor and melodic minor, because normally when you score in minor, you're not going to be using what is called the natural minor, but you're going to be using those other two that I just described. So that's the end of this video. We wrote some stuff in B flat major. We don't have to be afraid of the flats. We don't have to be afraid of different keys. We don't have to be afraid of the sheet music. Okay, so thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you can always give it a thumbs up. You can leave me a comment about ideas for other videos that I should make in the future. And I have a lot of videos recorded I still need to edit. I have a lot of videos coming out, so stay tuned and you'll be seeing a lot of new videos. Subscribe to my channel if you don't want to miss those videos. And that's it for all this. Until next time, take care and goodbye.